refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
That was Martin Luther King Jr.'s legendary "I Have a Dream" speech 57 years ago during the March on Washington. And it's been 57 years to the day that march happened. And we're commemorating that with yet another March on Washington, honestly bringing up the same issues that were brought up in the 1960s. And so we're gonna show you guys some of the incredible speeches that took place today. But before we do it, we're also going to go back in time, take a look at history, and take a look at how much things have changed or haven't changed. But first, let me give you a little bit of context about what's happening today. So participants gathered at the Lincoln Memorial for the event. It was organized by Reverend Al Sharpton and joined by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s son, Martin Luther King Jr. III. There were speeches from family members who have lost their loved ones as a result of police brutality, excessive force, and absolute evil and cruelty. And so their words were incredibly powerful, and it's important to share them with you. The event, dubbed the Commitment March, Get Your Knee Off Our Necks, brings an end to a tumultuous week, one that saw Jacob Blake shot by police in Wisconsin. It follows a summer that has been a global outcry over the killings of Black Americans at the hands of law enforcement, and it takes place in the midst of a pandemic that disproportionately affected people of color. With that said, I do want to go back in time to John Lewis's speech in 1963, where he specifically talks about how tired he is of being beaten and treated differently from white people in America. Take a look.
Those who have said be patient and wait, we must say that we cannot be patient. We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now. We are tired. We are tired of being beaten by policemen. We're tired of seeing our people locked up in jail over and over again. And then you holler, be patient. How long can we be patient? We want our freedom and we want it now. I appeal to all of you to get in this great revolution that is sweeping this nation. Get in and stay in the streets of every city, every village and hamlet of this nation until true freedom comes, until the revolution of 1776 is complete. We must get in this revolution and complete the revolution.
So those were strong words, an important speech, and we heard many of the same statements made today, 57 years later. Jayar, I wanted you to jump in and just share your thoughts before we go to some of those speeches.
Yeah, I was curious as to how many people knew John Lewis spoke on the same day or at that same event at the March on Washington. The reason that they even did it is, everyone likes to cite Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, one particular line of it, and then ignore almost everything else. Ignore what led up to it. Ignore what they said before and after that line. Ignore what other people that were at that event said. And ignore the fact that when they were doing it, the reason they were doing it is because our government wasn't listening to them. And that previous to all that, the protests and the boycotts and the arrests and the peaceful protests that were dubbed as violence because of the nature of the people that were there, all that stuff was happening. Because those other factors are ignored because a rational human being would look up and say, wow, sounds like right now. And so when you have people marching all across the country, because what else John Lewis was saying during that speech was, this isn't just happening in right here in the South. It's not just happening in Birmingham. It's not just happening in this city that you're hearing about. This is happening in like 3 or 4 other cities where they have to march and do this constantly over and over and over again. And not that we're enjoying getting arrested and sprayed by fire hoses, bit by dogs and put in prison. We're doing this because we need to get your attention. Now, when John Lewis was still around just this summer, and people ignored the fact that he's a civil rights icon, People talked all this trash about him. People sent him more racist things in recent years. We don't realize that we'll deify Martin Luther King from all circles, and Republicans will act like they love him. But if he was still around, they'd hate him just the same. He was the person that they didn't like then, and now then once he's gone, you can rewrite that history and have it form to your agenda. But John Lewis was still here, and I think if he was here today, he'd have been at the same event, and guess who would have brushed him aside yet again? But now we can start deifying him. We can start saying that everything he stood for in the civil rights era was something that we've achieved. No, we haven't. No, we haven't. Because if you listen to what he said, because we never do that, you'll hear that he's saying the same thing that protesters are saying right now that we're calling thugs, rioters, and looters. Just saying. But in order to formulate your opinion or formulate your words to create a new reality, you have to ignore what the previous people actually said.
Yeah, and one of the messages from the civil rights era that I think always gets kind of drowned out in discussions is the emphasis on economic opportunity, right? So you're right in that whenever we hear about Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, we hear that one line. But that speech touched on so many societal issues that negatively impacted the Black community in America at that time, and many of those same issues still stand today. And so it's listening to the speeches today I don't want to be so pessimistic. Like I want to have hope. And the reason why I chose that snippet of MLK's speech for the cold open of this story is because what amazed me about him was his optimism, right? He was fighting because he genuinely believed that we could accomplish and achieve a better country. And 57 years later, it's hard to see the endless video footage of Black people getting shot in the back, Black people getting choked to death in the middle of the street, seeing case after case of no justice, people who don't get charged after they lie to the judge in order to obtain a no-knock warrant and then use a battering ram to enter someone's home in the middle of the night and then shoot and kill an innocent person as she's in her bedroom, Breonna Taylor. Like these stories, they just crush the soul. They really do. And I want to go to some of these speeches that happened today, including Jacob Blake's sister, who also spoke during the March on Washington today. Let's take a quick look at that and we'll discuss.
America, your reality is not real. Catering to your delusions is no longer an option. We will not pretend. We will not be your docile slave. We will not be a footstool to oppression. Most of all, we will not dress up this genocide and boo and call it police brutality.
Even more so, man. Okay, so for people who maybe watched it or didn't, or outlets or politicians who paid attention or didn't pay attention today, they didn't listen to her either. She's just the sister of a guy who was shot multiple times and now has caused this much anger that they're also against now too. So you have to find out where you fall in. So as we start preaching how far we've come, start giving me some examples. Start explaining to the dead people or now the paralyzed people and their families as to give me some bullet point details of what we've done. We've done some things, sure. Why do these particular things keep happening? Why do these things keep happening? And we have to figure it out. And so the part about that reason I chose that section first, because even the line of police brutality being something that we call this, I think lightens the load off of them. The numbers of people that get killed indiscriminately, not saying it's a genocide because the numbers aren't the same as somewhere else, but throughout history in this country, we know how Black folks just expect bad behavior from cops because we've all experienced it. It's just the way it goes. And if we know this and you're not listening to us, it continues to happen. It's a very simple transaction. We talk, you listen. And after you talk, we listen too. It never really goes down that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I get frustrated when I hear arguments about how oh, well, sure, spread your message or speak out against what you perceive to be wrong, but don't be angry, right? Protest, but protest in a specific way. But there's no winning. There's absolutely no winning. Colin Kaepernick does a peaceful protest where he literally just kneels during the national anthem, and he's absolutely antagonized, demonized, loses his entire NFL career as a result of that. And so they're going to refer people who have been gaslighting about the reality of this country are gonna go ahead and disagree with the message no matter what, regardless of what the presentation is, which is why I have no patience for anyone who wants to come at me or anyone today about how, protesters were surrounding Rand Paul and they made Rand Paul uncomfortable. Well, okay, let's ask ourselves, how did we get to this point? Because it was only a few months ago, Rand Paul gave an impassioned objection on the Senate floor against legislation that would criminalize lynching on a federal level. Okay, obviously people's voices haven't been heard. Things don't just go from calm to people surrounding a politician overnight. This kind of stuff has been going on for a long time and people haven't been heard. Jacob Blake's father also spoke today. Let's take a look at that.
There are two systems of justice in the United States. There's a white system and there's a black system. The black system ain't doing so well. But we're gonna stand up. Every black person in the United States is gonna stand up. We're tired. I'm tired of looking at cameras and seeing these young black and brown people suffer. We're gonna hold court on systematic racism. Guilty. Yeah. Guilty. Guilty.
So, yeah, and we just watched the RNC happen, and both the DNC and RNC did this. So I'm not saying it's particular to the RNC, but we just did hear the RNC where people come out and speak about, their daughter that was doing humanitarian work overseas in dangerous areas and then got abducted by terrorists and murdered, and how they wish something else would have been done structurally within the system of our government to help her sooner than it took. And it ended up in her death. I apologize for not knowing the family's name. It slips my mind, but so when you hear the constant and stream of families where victims were murdered by cops and tell you their story and talk about what they're going through and how this country continues to ignore their issues, why doesn't that ring to you as well? Why doesn't that stick with you? Because it sticks with a lot of people, but why doesn't it stick with the people that have these positions of power to do these things? It's strictly because they don't want to. They're ignoring it. They're overlooking it. So the all lives matter folks saying, that's what we should be saying. Hey, we're looking at the rest of the lives that matter, that were lost. You are not looking at the lives that we're talking about. So when you hear an impassioned plea from a father like that about what we need, who needs to be on trial, which is the racism in this country, will you hear him? There's another opportunity. There's another historic event. It's an anniversary year of this whole thing, 57 years on this. So are you gonna listen yet? Like, what's it gonna take? Why we, and my approach is, why are we still talking to you? Because you've already proven to me that you have no interest in discussing this. I'm not sure what the next step would be if we're not gonna have this conversation anymore, but we already know one side is not listening.
Do you feel any optimism or hope for the future of race relations in America?
I always do, because so as we're talking about how many things haven't changed, there are more, I think, because obviously I wasn't around in the 1960s, but I think there are more people that are seeing exactly what it is that has been happening, how much people have ignored it. I've got plenty of friends that sure supported the fight against explicit police murder and brutality in the country directed at black folks, but they never were mobilized or felt the need and a fire in their belly to come out and do something. The way this summer has been full of these protests all across the country. And yes, sure, there were white folks and other ethnicities of folks in these protests in the 60s. And we're just living in what we're seeing now. I've seen progress in what the citizenry is willing to see and do and try to force the hand of the powers that be about it. So it's along those lines, which are always, that's always heartfelt, and I feel good about that. And it's a matter of convincing the folks that actually do something as far as legislation and those next steps to do something.
Absolutely. One more video from today, and this is George Floyd's brother speaking at the March on Washington.
I wish George were here to see this right now. That's who I'm marching for. I'm marching for George, for Brianna, for Ahmaud, for Jacob, for Pamela Turner, for Michael Brown, Trayvon, and anybody else who lost their lives or are too evil. As of now, everybody out here right now, our leaders, they need to follow us while we're marching to enact laws to protect us.
Man, it's hard, man. It's really hard. I'm so sorry, man.
The brother of a man that was murdered on camera in 4 different angles has to go in front of all these folks and tell the story yet again after he already told it on TV before, and then try to fight through the tears and the emotion to tell you how bad it is. And he still has to come up with a coherent thought that is, we're out here and we're not leaders. He mentioned how hot it was too. We're out here and we're not the leaders, but we need the leaders to start following us. It's such a simple concept. What are we there for? Because you know what a lot of these guys in the White House and many conservatives in general will say is, fine, you have the right to protest. What are they protesting for? What's the point of a protest? Just so you can disparage them and talk about how horrible they are? Or is it so that that can affect change? So when the NBA decides to not play for a couple days and then you get mad at them, what's the point of protesting? It's supposed to lead to change. Hey, George Floyd's brother and Jacob Blake's family can't walk into Congress and enact legislation and vote on it. They can't go to the Senate and force Mitch McConnell to finally bring up a vote. And we're gonna get to Rand Paul, so I'm holding all my fire for him. But this is how this is supposed to work. When citizens come out and speak to you about their problems and what things need to change and give you reasons and proof behind it, dead bodies, then you're supposed to listen because you're supposed to serve us. Now, when other folks that you actually deem reasonable or worth it come out and talk about things that needs to be changed in this country, you listen to them because you think they're worth listening to. There's a hierarchy of which citizens are worth their points and their perspectives and ones that are. And we're seeing that drawn every day by our leadership. So yeah, you can say, oh yeah, we don't have anything against you protesting. We just have something against you looting and rioting. Well, I don't need you to be against me protesting. I need you to listen to me protesting and then do something about it.
Right. Because the emphasis on the looting and rioting is specifically meant to deflect from the core of the message, of the demonstrators. And I think that's very intentional by the very people who have no interest in listening to that message or doing what's right. And I'm specifically talking about politicians, what's right to represent people. I mean, they're supposed to be public servants. And let me just say, after losing someone close to me this year who wasn't even a family member and feeling that pain, and this was, he had an illness we didn't know about and he died suddenly. If someone in my family was murdered and it was on camera and it was a case of police murder that was justified over and over again, how do you not get angry? How do you not want revenge? That is a very human emotion, and it's just constant insult to injury. It's the lack of justice. It's the constant replay of that footage that's traumatizing for most people who have a soul, a heart, anything, right? And then on top of it, it's the nonstop gaslighting and commentary about how the victim deserved it. How do you not get angry? How do you tell people, don't be upset? Demonstrate calmly. I'm just telling you right now, I wouldn't be able to do it. And I just give everyone who participated in the March on Washington today a ton of credit, because it takes a lot of strength to go up there and talk about something as traumatizing and as heartbreaking as watching a family member get shot in the back several times, or watching a family member get slaughtered in broad daylight, and know that there's unlikely to be any justice in those cases.
Yeah, it's hard to talk to friends and family about someone you've lost, let alone talking to people who don't care and actually are aggressively against your story, because that's happening consistently. We already know that, and there's enough people in this country. We know there's wild people online and stuff, but so the fact you have to come out knowing you're facing opposition for your story for nothing you did, Jacob Blake's family wasn't looking for this to happen one day and be like, this would be fun to go out on this media tour and talk about how he got shot 7, 8 times in his back. That's great. So this summer's kind of boring. Let's have this happen. What makes you think that they want to be there? No, we're voiding people of their emotions. It's part of a racist approach to someone. If you see someone up there crying, or if we've seen how many times this happened. I mentioned with the NBA guys a couple of days ago, that they're boycotting, which is wrong. They're protesting. They're doing all this stuff, and they're not collecting their checks. Or what about they're helping the millions of dollars that they're making? What about there are some human beings who are tired of seeing us, and maybe they can't focus on basketball right now? We're separating them from human emotion, and that's what happened in slavery days. You separate them from humans. We call them animals, so that you can murder them at any point and be like, yeah, it was just another cattle on my ranch. I needed to put that one down. That's how it's always been here, and we still haven't really fully come out of it. So when you see George Floyd's brother, they're crying and apologizing for crying. Who apologizes for crying over a brother's death? For that we don't feel any kind of connection to him, because we've separated emotion from certain people already.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. I really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, Jayar. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.